Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our April Beachside chat. We are so excited to have you here with us today. I am Dr. Delara Uskup of the Los Angeles Metropolitan Churches. And again, we are so excited to be here again with the City of Los Angeles Department of Cannabis Regulation, Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance Program. And we want to support everyone out there in obtaining a commercial cannabis license and operating a successful cannabis business. And this session this evening is a part of that. Just as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded for educational purposes. Camera and audio functions will not be available to attendees via Zoom webinar. However, attendees will be able to see, hear, and learn from the panelists. And there will be an open chat box where you can comment on the discussion, and we encourage you to utilize the Q&A box at the bottom panel of your Zoom screen to ask any questions. Feel free to include your email with your comments so we're able to respond to your questions, even if we can't address them in this live webinar. As a reminder, we're here again with the Department of Cannabis BLC Business Licensing and Compliance Assistance Program, and that is to support you in getting that commercial cannabis license and operating that successful business. Some of the program highlights include self-directed online learning and education on topics related to running a successful cannabis business, live webinars and beachside chats with subject matter experts such as this one this evening, checklists, worksheets, and other management tools. And we encourage you to refer to cannabis.lacity.org for more announcements on our expanding BLC program. As a reminder, this content was not created by the Department of Cannabis Regulation or the City of Los Angeles, and it is for informational purposes only. The information is subject to change and does not replace or supersede the Los Angeles Municipal Code, nor constitute legal advice. You can call 213-978-0738 during business hours. That's Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. to speak to a DCR representative should you have any questions, comments, or concerns. And our evening panelists for this evening are going to be comprised of myself and our co-host, Brad Rowe. Excited to have Brad here as we co-host this exciting session on what to know about internal cybersecurity controls. And as you all know, our Beachside chat is designed to really be a dialogue between the LAM team and our subject matter experts to bring you cutting edge information to support your cannabis business. And in this Beachside chat, we're talking about cannabis cybersecurity and internal security controls to understand the business vulnerabilities your organization may face. And we want to consider this evening how various digital and physical systems within a social equity applicant or licensee's cannabis business can be vulnerable to security-related threats, including the POS systems, internet fiber entry, and electric systems. And so we want to identify those potential weaknesses and system component interdependencies, so how the different systems in your business are working, and figure out what those cybersecurity threats are so we can take action accordingly. And I will let Brad introduce our two panelists for this evening.
Thanks, Delara. Here we are. We're at it again. It's been a wonderful spring, and this brings to an end. This is our last beachside chat until we move on to other things. And we have saved the best for last. We have got Dr. Stan Stahl. He's with us. Stan goes back a ways. He's been at this. Going back to White House work many administrations ago, but he's also founded and created something called Secure the Village. It's a nonprofit community-based response to cybercrime and privacy crisis. And he's also the director of information security at Miller Kaplan, where he brings his expertise to mid-size and smaller businesses and nonprofits. So that's really why we're here today with Dr. Stan Stahl, and he's gonna be helping us out and helping out our social equity businesses. In addition to the community leadership that he's got through Secure the Village, Stan is serving on the advisory board of the LA Cyber Lab and Small Business Advisory Council of the Cyber Readiness Institute. So please don't be shy. He was a security pioneer back in the 1980s, securing teleconferencing between the White House and key federal agencies, databases inside Cheyenne Mountain and the communications network controlling our nuclear weapons arsenal. So this is a guy who knows what's up. So apply that expertise to your businesses. Our other guest today, subject matter expert, Haley Glover, is a senior security consultant at Sapphire Risk Advisory Group. They're out of out of Texas. Sapphire is a nationwide cannabis security consulting firm that has written over 500 city and state applications and designed the security for over 70 build-outs in 35 states since 2013. So they've been at this. After receiving her first level 1 alarm technician license, Haley has managed security installations in various high-risk verticals, including cannabis, jewelry, pawn, Department of Defense facilities. She works directly with cannabis clients to ensure projects and build-outs are cost efficient, meet or exceed city or state regulations, and provide the security to properly operate this facility. So with that, we give a warm welcome to Dr. Stan Stahl and to Haley Clover. So nice to have you guys with us.
And you know what, Brad, let's get right into our questions. I have been really excited about this evening and bringing these two subject matter experts to our social equity applicants and licensees. And the first question I want to raise is, what steps should social equity licensees and applicants take to ensure digital and physical systems at cannabis businesses are protected? So what should be their first steps at their business?
Well, I'll jump in where, angels fear to tread. And first thing is, know your information, know what you've got, know what's sensitive, know where your crown jewels are, know what they are, know what information legally you've got to protect. Wrap your head around, what do I got that I need to protect? And then you can begin looking at okay, how do we do it? What are the laws? Blah, blah, blah. But first thing, you got to know what you got to protect.
Absolutely. And, kind of going with that, like Brad said, is we do write a lot of the applications. And when you're submitting those applications to the city or the state, you do have to include a lot of what your business operations are going to look like. So it's not only just writing about it, it's how are you going to implement once you get your business going. And so it's really having that outline of what's needed and what risks you need to identify before you even get started. So absolutely, just knowing what you need to be implementing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's interesting. You both sort of look at it from a little bit of a different angle as far as the steps taken to ensure that that those systems are in place and protected. This isn't just a top level thing, though, right? So what you got to get buy-in from the employees. You got to have the whole crew on board. So what sort of training do you think employees need to be provided to navigate? Let's say this isn't just sort of the protection or the inventorying of your assets and making sure you know what you have out there, but what should they be doing in order to be ready to navigate an emergency, to deal with loss of power, security vaults, hacks, issues with your cyber vaults, anything like that? What are your thoughts on that?
I'll say that on the security side, is having that emergency planning prepared is crucial. There can be some turnover, and you might have a security manager who's supposed to be in charge of navigating through those moments. But let's just say you've got a new employee, you've got to make sure that everyone does know what they need to be doing. So let's just say a power outage. Do you have something to have that backup battery on your systems and make sure that it can stay up and running for you to be able to get on site, identify what's going on, and assessing to see what you need to do next? Are you storing all of your like the main brain of your alarm system and your recording system of your video? Is it somewhere that's easily accessible? Because when you do have that power outage, they want to go for the most vulnerable areas. So that might include where your systems are, to where they might think they might be on camera. So really just having that training throughout every single employee that's involved at the facility.
Yeah, I'd echo that, Haley. I mean, absolutely right. Just truly understanding everybody's role in all of this. But first, at the front end, that role of protection. So people have got to be trained in, example, phishing attacks, phishing. That's the greatest likelihood. If you get breached, it will come through a phishing attack. It's not certain, but that's the greatest likelihood. So you got to train your people. Just do not click on a link, open an attachment unless you expect it. Know who's sending it. I mean, due diligence. Don't trust, verify. That's a common mantra in today's cybersecurity. And then all the way, okay, so if something bad goes on, you got to be prepared for it. You got to both be able to detect when something's gone wrong. You got to be able to immediately recover from that attack and then restore going back to business as usual. And that's a role everybody's got to play. Everybody has a role to play in that, as Haley was just saying. You've got to be trained. We do a lot of what are called tabletop exercises. We'll get IT and the executives in a room and we'll say, okay, suppose this happened. What are you going to do about it? And we'll wait. Well, IT and management look at each other like, well, are you supposed to tell me what to do? Or are you supposed to tell me what to do? What are we supposed to do here? Better to think through that before it happens than to wait until after it happens. I mean, to Haley's point, have everything documented you can, who's your internet service provider? Where's the alarm system? All those pieces of the business, document it, have it written down. Not on the computer that now you can't get to because of a disaster. Make sure that it's on paper as well and people can get it. I mean, those begin to be some of the answers, Dr. Dye and Brad, I think, to what you're asking about here. Vital stuff.
Dr. Stahl, as a little follow-up to that, and I would love to hear both your feedback on this. I wondered, as we've been, as Dr. D and I have been working through and sort of developing readiness checklists and looking at how we can provide the best information to Los Angeles Social Equity Program licensees. You want to have redundancies, I'm assuming, right? You want to have a couple of people who know how to do something in case so-and-so is sick or they leave the company or something like that. What's that fine line though? How many people do you include? And at what point do you say that's too many? How do you establish that?
I'm smiling because that is such a big challenge for small companies. And it's not just on the security side, it's also a fundamental principle of finance, that the person who writes the checks is not the person that also checks the register, reconciles the account. And you want that same kind of segregation of duties. So, and you want cross-training as well, so that other people can pick up each other's job. The smaller you are, the harder that is to do, frankly. So in the broad general space, what you want to be thinking about is not point solutions like who's going to do that and who's going to do this and all, but try to think more long-term. What's your program? And in the course of the program, where now you're looking every month, how are we doing? Are we getting hit? Are we okay? What's happening? Now you can begin to just build in over time. Okay, Sally's going to do some of what Bob normally does because we want Sally to be cross-trained. And meanwhile, Bob's going to pick up some of what Jose does because we want that to be cross-trained. And you begin that process, but it's a process. You do not get it done overnight.
Absolutely. I'm right there on the same page, especially if you are a smaller business, it's a little bit more difficult. And it's also, whenever you're saying, I want for this one employee to have the passwords to all my systems and that person's not available, it does really limit what you're able to do. So definitely having that redundancy, that's one of my favorite words, especially in security, but also having that cross training to where there is somebody else who might not have all the information, but does have the resources. Having that information saved somewhere where you can access it and you at least know what the process looks like. Because again, it's something where if you have one dedicated person who's handling most of this majority of the time, and the other person who has been trained on it, if you haven't done it in a while, you might forget some of those details. So having those resources and having it outlined of where you can go and look to be able to go back through that process.
Yeah, simple phrase you brought up earlier, and thank you, Haley. Simple phrase you brought up, Dr. Stahl, a table talk. Like the idea, it just sort of brings up a visual of people sitting around and sort of figuring it out before it happens. So thank you for new vocabulary. We appreciate it. And
happy to.
With that, I'll pass it on to Laura for the next question.
Yes. How do social equity licensees and applicants protect critical POS and other systems from inadvertent or unauthorized access? So what are some simple steps? And I love, Dr. Stan, how you talked about having documents printed, and Haley, you were articulating about, having duplicity, having redundancy, and that's something very simple. So how can we think about protecting these critical POS systems and other systems from inadvertent use, and what might be some other kind of tangible things that our social equity applicants and licensees can incorporate into their business today?
Haley, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. So I would say that on my end, just for the physical security equipment that might connect to your POS system, there's tons of those video management software platforms that can tie in. So awesome for when you're going back through and trying to, see if any purchases that were made or anything. But I would say not just your simple password, but multi-factor authentication. One simple password can be somewhat easy to get by. But when you have multiple ways that you're logging into these devices and accessing this really sensitive information, whether that be medical records or patient information or credit cards, it is something that you really want to make sure that you're protecting. And that's a pretty simple solution that you can implement, but that is something that will protect tons of your different devices that you're going to be having at your facility.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. The use of multi-factor authentication is becoming much more common nowadays than it was even 5 years ago, and certainly take advantage of it. The statistics are just overwhelming in terms of how it blocks breach attacks. Some of the other things you want to do as well. POS system, it's a computer, basically. It's just connected to other computers and does specific things. So you want to treat it the way you treat other computers. First of all, everybody who is authorized access to it needs to have a separate account on it so that you can distinguish, Haley's on it between noon and 2 and Stan's on it between 2 and 4. And if something bad happens at 2:15, that was my watch. So you can do that kind of analysis. You want to keep it updated, patched and updated. Their programs come out regularly, Microsoft once a month. Again, one of the things like multi-factor authentication for users, keeping computers patched and updated is absolutely a requirement for the technical management of it as well. The other thing you want to do is not so much designed to protect its access to it, but what if something goes wrong? Have we collected the evidence necessary so we can figure out what really happened? Sometimes that can be vital, because you can have a device get breached, and then there's enough forensic information that when the experts get in and look at it, they can say, yes, it was breached, but there was no sensitive information that was stolen. And now you've just saved yourself a big breach disclosure. But if you don't have that audit information available, your forensics people aren't going to be able to give you that vote of confidence. So that's another thing on the back end you also want to take care about.
And right on the I will say that that's a part of the regulations in California. If you cannot explain what happened and why there was a breach and how it was resolved, there could be some bigger problems. So it's important to keep records of everything and just be able to make note of what happened and how you resolved it.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So, and we touched on it just for a second earlier, but what happens when this, these critical shifts happen? Someone gets fired, and maybe it's even under some not under a cloud or something, and they hold on to important information. How do you guard your cyber and your physical systems against sort of a, I don't know if you call it a sudden vulnerability, but these things can happen very quickly. What do you put into your standard operating procedures? What do you do is this another table talk? Is this, how do we guard our company against some of these events where all of a sudden you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, we've got a lot of vulnerability? Or how do you mitigate that? How do you reduce that vulnerability?
I would say on my end, something that we try to do is, when you have your employees, always make a list of what they have access to. So whether that just be, the access control credentials or the alarm system, the code to be able to arm and disarm that, or logging into your surveillance system. But that would include if they have a key to the front door, or if they were one of the managers and they were able to gain access to any of the inventory, or was involved with any of the cash handling and cash management procedures, but making a list of every single thing that they have access to. So that way, whenever that employee does leave, that you can go through and have that checklist of, okay, we've taken care of this, but then also going and changing any passwords that were maybe the master ones, but kind of just going through, making sure that you are keeping those up to date, and so that you do remove any possible access. They should never be able to, I would say, have access to your surveillance system to where you can't remove their access at any point in time. You should always be able to go back as the owner of the business and remove access at any time. So we're just really limiting who is able to get into anything of those systems. And I would say same thing as with your IT. I mean, you want to limit who has access to those. It's just sensitive information.
And just to follow up on that, you're talking about a very centralized control system where you actually know who's got access and can sort of turn things on and off very quickly. Can you describe what that system looks like a little bit, and then we'll move on to Dr. Stahl?
I would say that it kind of depends. So if it's server based, that's kind of, think of it as one computer that has access to everything. But for the most part, I would say that for a dispensary, for example, we don't see everything on one server. It's usually broken up quite a bit, so it's not as much on one device, but again, kind of keeping records of how to remove that access, where it's located, and then verifying it. If it's something where you can call your alarm installer and you can say, hey, can you please verify that I removed their credentials, that they do not have access, they're not on the call list, and just running through and having that verification done.
Mhm.
Great, thank you.
Again, completely agree. Just to add to it somewhat. First of all, what you said, Haley, I mean, the owner of the company has got to have full unfettered access to everything, whether it's servers or the point of POS systems or systems in the cloud, all of that. That's got to be fundamental, that the owner's got all the passwords. In fact, things should be set up, if you've got IT that can manage it, so that nobody has these master passwords but the owner of the company. And even IT uses subsidiary credentials in logging on. That's a little bit more sophisticated, so smaller companies can't do that. The other thing you need to do is, and again, it goes to larger organizations, because some of this isn't cost effective for smaller organizations, is what's called digital loss prevention. And you can actually build into your network tools that, let's say somebody's trying to email out a social security number or a credit card number, it'll observe that and block it. So you begin to get some visibility into what people are doing. You've always got to be prepared for what we call adverse termination. Sometimes it can be an employee that you've got to fire who may have access. Even if it's just the POS system, you got to get them off the POS system. Whatever it is, to Haley's point, you got to be able to get them off of those systems when excuse me, when that happens. So that's critical. Also as well. So we had a case once where somebody was fired. We went to get access to the cloud, one of the cloud those systems that they were using. The IT guy was the only one who had authorization, and we actually had to get a lawyer to interface with their lawyers so our client could get access. So you don't want to get into that state. You want to make sure you've got these passwords and that capability before that. Accounts in the cloud should be in the name of the business, not in the name of the IT vendor, as another illustration of it. So it's the business that owns that. Those are some of the other things to just be cautious about, be careful.
So Stan, just to follow up on that, assuming there are some companies out there where maybe the owners aren't necessarily that active in operations, is there sort of a proxy or someone that you would assign that agency to have those passwords and and be accountable to or responsible to the owner? How do you work that out?
That's a very good question, Brad, because not everybody's is willing to take that on. You get a trusted advisor, a lawyer, or your accountant could be a person to do that. If you've got cybersecurity subject matter experts on your team, they could potentially hold that. I know in our case, we wouldn't want to. We would say, let's have your accountant manage that. Again, it's part of the segregation of duties. If we have all the passwords, we're too dangerous. So, what if we get breached?
Yeah, right. Good point. Yeah, great. Thanks.
My next question is, should building locks, safes, digital badges, user accounts have digital backup codes for emergency access in case of critical power failures or emergencies? So do you all recommend having these? This is something that we're seeing newly emerging, these digital backup codes. What would you all recommend to just be in a state of readiness for these critical power failures or any other type of emergency?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that most of the systems now, they do come with one, and you can always ask for your alarm vendor to help you do something remotely to where you can at least get the access in, set a new password, go in, you change everyone else's passwords and get that done safely. And, honestly, kind of the old school method is, the manual lock and key, that there's always going to be that backup. And I'm saying that you've got one for your safe. A safe will always come with one, and it's not something that can be picked. It's not an easy access type of thing, but definitely having those backups prepared and what to do in that event. And I would say that for the most part, all of your systems should have some sort of backup for that, even in a power loss. They should always be able to, because they do stay up to date as long as you keep that software updated and you do go in and review it. Make sure that nothing looks funky on it to where, you might have some questions about what that reporting is doing and why it looks different than normal. But absolutely always having that backup and knowing how to be able to gain access to those items. Because I'd say, especially during a power outage, it's pretty scary if you think that just it's free reign in there. So knowing how your systems work and knowing how to unlock them in the event of a power failure.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I don't have much to add. I'm a strategist more than in the trenches, kind of what system you use or how you do it. It's more make sure you do it, everything Haley talked about, and test it, practice it. Make sure it's going to work when you need it. I mean, just recently, just to give an illustration, I ended up with a flat tire in my car, and I don't have a spare. It's one of those cars that doesn't have a spare. Now, fortunately, I got AAA, so I was able to call and they came. But if you think about it, if it's your business, you want to know where that spare is and how to get it, or how to quickly call AAA if that's what you need to do. You don't want to be scratching your head like, oh my God, what do I do now when the power is out?
No, absolutely. And I'll say that, for the most part, systems should have a backup battery for it, just so it can stay on. Sometimes it's anywhere from, I'd say, an hour to 4 hours, but knowing how long that can last, knowing that you're able to get there on site in time, and just your systems will operate. But it should also be alerting you within no more than 5 minutes if you have a power failure. So that way you know how to respond once that power has gone out.
Ilya, I want to ask you a follow-up. How do you evaluate third-party vendors' products like security cameras? And I know you were sharing some things with me earlier before we started our Beachside chat when we were first meeting each other, and it was really distressing about security cameras and some of the vulnerabilities. So I would love if you, whatever you can detail from what you were sharing, to share that with our social equity applicants and licensees, and how they can be prepared for failures on the part of something so important like security cameras.
No, absolutely. And, that's something that I'll say I spend a lot of time researching. There is always something new about some camera manufacturer getting hacked, and it's something every week. But, there was one that was, I believe it was last year or the year before. It was a cloud-based camera system. They were pretty new and they were just all over the place. And so I sat in on a webinar Well, a couple months later, they ended up having an internal hack. And I think it was about 150,000 accounts that were attacked. That included hospitals, jails, schools. It was pretty significant. And if you think about it, it's breaking a lot of rules there. Just because obviously if there are medical records that have been released, that's a pretty significant issue. But what it was is, the internal hack was something that shouldn't have ever happened. This camera manufacturer, that should have absolutely never happened to where they were able to access that many accounts. They shouldn't be able to just log in without having permission ever at any point in time. And, I think that, again, it does take a lot of research and knowing what's going on. But I would say that if you get a bid from a security installer, you can always just type in, put that camera manufacturer and then put hack. And, it's something where you might be able to see that something that's come up recently, or if it was something that was 15 years ago and they have now made plenty of statements and shown the proof that they have done what it takes to prevent that from happening again as much as possible. Obviously, there's always going to be a risk. Hackers have gotten smarter and smarter, so it's pretty difficult to stay up to it 100%, but just doing the research and then asking questions about those manufacturers and knowing that it is something that's good for your business. I'd say that my Ring camera works great for my apartment, but it's not something that should ever be at a cannabis facility. So, knowing that it's being used in the right application and knowing that that equipment is going to be doing what you want it to be doing. So being able to access it remotely, being able to be expandable to where, say, you have one building and you want to have a second one that's across the parking lot, and just making sure that it's something that's user-friendly for you. So there's tons that are out there, but definitely doing the research on it. And, there's companies that would be happy to help you with that, just because some of it does get a little bit intense as far as the information on what you're looking at. But there are definitely people like myself that would be happy to help with finding that information out.
Yeah. Again, Haley, I think you kind of nailed it in many ways. And the story of the hack, that breach is yeah, I remember we covered that. We do a weekly news as part of Secure the Village, and I remember when that story came up. This last week, a different story about cameras came up, and it's a different aspect of what Haley talked about. This is not a breach that we know, at least we don't know of any specific breaches, but the WISE camera systems, many of those models, 3 years ago, researchers said to WISE, hey, you got some vulnerabilities here, you should fix them. And 3 years later, WISE still had not fixed them. And that, I don't want to throw words around like criminal, because it's not criminal. There's no law, you must do that. But that's just a total disrespect of the moral implications of having, if you're going to put cameras out there, any technology, you've got a moral responsibility to the users that as vulnerabilities are found, and they will be, that you fix them. And one of the things we look at when we're looking, whether it's cameras or any other third party, we'll look at the company's information security management program. What do they do in general? Do they just make cameras? Well, even if they just make cameras, how do they protect all their information? How do they protect the intellectual property that goes into those cameras? How do they make sure that no bad guys can breach the cameras as they're being manufactured? Or that's what happened, not on cameras, but with SolarWinds several months ago, if you recall, when 18,000 companies got breached because their vendors' software got breached. So this is all part of what you have to manage. And it's hard. I mean, there's no, particularly when you're looking at small businesses, resources are tight. These are more things that the big guys do, but the little guys have to get it in their consciousness. How much of that can we do that's reasonable without, obviously, we can't spend all of our resources on security. We got to buy inventory if nothing else. But manage those pieces. California in one place makes it easier because California has Internet of Things laws, regulations. If you're making cameras, you cannot have a default password You have to be able to take those out, which is another thing when your IT guy's installing these cameras, make sure he changes the default passwords. Otherwise, they're easy to breach. But California, again, they've got laws behind it, but they're not being well enforced yet. So, you can't look to the laws to protect you, but you can at least look to the laws and say to your IT guy who's putting in those cameras, do we know that these comply? And again, don't trust, verify.
Stan, you brought up Secure the Village, and that's something that's been your baby for a long time, and just the idea of it's really cool. So I don't know if we need to get into specifics of what your organization is, but how do you think about bringing people, sort of democratizing this? This is providing this knowledge and these tools and the way to think about this to the people, which is precisely what we're doing tonight.
Yeah.
So talk about that. Talk about where that hit you. What was your inspiration for doing that? And how have you succeeded in building out the community you have so that maybe some of the people out there tonight or DCR itself can think about what is the idea behind building a community and getting that community out, and how do you distribute that information and make sure that people are learning?
Well, first, Brad, thanks for the question. I mean, it speaks to my passion here. About 10 years ago, I was president of the Los Angeles chapter of the Information Systems Security Association, which is a professional association that's been around, started in LA in the 80s. It's international now. And it just became more and more clear to me as I saw more and more cybercrime taking place and more laws around it as well, that it wasn't enough for the experts to talk to the experts. That was necessary, but it wasn't going to be sufficient. We came up with the concept of just like, there's a book in the 90s, it takes a village to raise a child, coming out of an African proverb. And it occurred to us that it takes the village to secure the village. We got to get everybody involved in this to the extent that let's say one of your cannabis companies, to the extent that they get breached. So look at the implications as it ripples out across society, right? First of all, it might put them out of business. I mean, some large percentage of small businesses that get breached never reopen their doors. So it puts them out of business. That puts their employees out on the streets where now they have to go find other jobs, right? Their customers now have to go find other places to get cannabis, and all of those things. And as it ripples across the economy, the impact is tremendous. And the amount of crime is also, I mean, the FBI estimates about $10 million a month is lost just in LA, just on online bank fraud. And you count the number of people that $10 million a month employs, and it's enormous. So we got to do something. And ultimately, and this is where the village concept comes in, and it was reflected in our news of the week last week, that an essay by two leaders, one former head of Cyber Command, just on the need for community to help each other here, because we're short 600,000 cybersecurity experts in the country, right? There's only 1 million, so we're short another 600,000. That's a big percentage of how many open jobs there are. There is so much that this company will learn to do, and then this company will learn to do, but something different. And if they only talk to each other, oh, you're doing this. Oh, you're doing this. They'll both now be doing both of those things, because nobody's got all the answers, particularly when you get down into smaller businesses. We've learned over 40 years how to protect the NSA and, classified systems and all. But ultimately, it comes down to leadership more than anything else, Brad. And that leadership is contagious. You're bringing it to the community through what you're doing. LA Cyber Lab takes it to the community as well. We do that. There are other nonprofits. I mean, all of your listeners, 30 of us, need to know about the Cyber Readiness Institute. They've got all kinds of materials, lessons, tutorials. They've got certification programs, all designed for small guys, not for the big companies. If you're a nonprofit, know about Searchlight Security. Same kind of thing. I mean, they focus on helping the nonprofits in this space. So there's a lot of this stuff already going on. The real challenge we face right now, Brad, and it's being met in part by events like this, is just get the word out. Get the word out so every business owner, whether it's in cannabis or, accounting, take something totally different, understands this stuff and knows what to do about it. And we're all in this together. That's the village. Nobody can do it by themselves.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And to your point, we do have attendees tonight. This video will also be available on the learning management system for social equity businesses in perpetuity. So it's going to be around for a while. So thank you for this good advice. Haley, do you want to add anything to that about sort of building community and that sense of sort of democratizing what used to be sort of the provenance of the upper echelon of cybersecurity? And I think you're on mute. Oh, you're good. All right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, kind of like he was saying, is it does take a village. There's a lot of moving parts just from the very beginning of, the applying for your license to opening up your business and then keeping up with everything and knowing, what type of regulations you need to continue to follow. I think that one of your strongest practices that you can really be implementing is your standard operating procedures. Knowing to go and audit your systems, knowing how to test your systems and making sure that you have your software up to date, but really just using your resources. I'll say that there's tons of great information that you can get from reputable websites that really do show you what they would recommend on how to keep up with everything and prevent anything from happening, whether that be a burglary or robbery or it be a cyber attack. And then also speaking with your community. I would say that that's probably one of the best things you can do because they'll know what's going on around their area, and just having that communication and kind of, it's almost like watching each other's back. And, if they see something, say something, but it does take a lot to keep your business up and running, and just knowing what resources you have readily available is going to be one of the best ways to remain successful in the industry.
Yeah, it sounds like it comes down to some pretty basic practices, and you guys have brought up some different things that are basic practices. We talked about phishing before. We talked about some other sort of ideas that sort of, I guess, fall into the category of social engineering. And that's sort of was popping into my head as both of you guys were talking about working with your communities. It's really about changing the dialogue and the language and the vocabulary and priorities and just bringing these things up and demystifying it, making it a little more sort of comfortable, taking the stigma away from talking about something like cybersecurity. Because as one of you pointed out, it's probably not the reason most of these people got into business. It's not the first thing that they wanted to do with cybersecurity. So
Really?
thank you guys for sharing all that. Delar, is there anything else you wanted to jump in? I know we have some closeout questions, but is there anything you wanted to interject?
Yes, I just was so excited to bring in some questions from our audience. We have one question that says, I see retail storefronts making copies of medical recommendations, scanning and sending them to some folder on a front desk PC. What process do you recommend for private medical recs when making copies for store records?
I would say first, I would not want it to be too much out front in the open. Those are sensitive records and sensitive information. So that's something that I would say, take it into a secure area. Have a secure filing cabinet that you can put that into and scanning it in. There's definitely got to be a safer way that you can make sure that that is going into maybe a program that's meant for those types of records. I don't know off the top of my head of one, but it is something I would say that try and keep it away from the front of your facility. And again, kind of keeping it in a secured area so that it's not just easily accessible. But Dr. Stan, do you have any recommendations on how to safely get that onto a computer and store it safely away?
Well, it goes, Haley, to what you were talking about, sir. First, as much as you can, things should take place in a secure environment. So, what is a secure environment? It could be a scanner behind the security desk as a part of that. Somebody comes in and here's the records. It's what happens from the scanning process back that becomes, in many ways, first, once you're through scanning or whatever, you got to securely deal with the paper. So whether that's a fixed file cabinet that's locked and protected, again, with the owner having the key, or if now that it's online, we don't need the paper, so let's scan it, not scan it, shred it. So that's, take care of the paper. Once it gets into digital form, wherever it goes and is stored, that device needs to be encrypted. So it means it's all coded up. Somebody can open it up, the hard drive, look at it, and it will all be gibberish. That becomes a vital piece. And then all the things we talked about earlier around access control, digital loss prevention, to make sure it doesn't get emailed out of the company or copied onto a USB drive as well, those kinds of things. Whatever you're again, you should have a set of policies and standards that fit your business organization and tell you how you're going to deal with these things. It's not complicated. There was a point here about, this is also complicated. I'd rather run an illegal operation. I can't decide for you which to do, but this stuff really isn't complicated. What it requires, though, is that you sit down and think it through. And that's best to do with a guide, somebody that's been there, done that. I mean, Haley, you do that with your clients. I can, I don't know for sure, but we've talked enough. Yeah, you guys do this. We do that. There are others as well. Get a guide and work it through so it makes sense in your business.
I wanted to jump back to something you guys were both talking about before, which was if an incident happens, sort of this idea of a duty to report, right? And it's sort of like, how do you even know you have a duty to report? How do you know what was lost? And can you guys just kind of unwind that a little bit and back up? Because how do I, Stan, your opening salvo was know what you have, what's precious, what's your inventory, what do we need to protect? And then Haley, you were talking about sort of having a knowledge of what is vulnerable, what could have been hacked, what might have disappeared, not only initiating this duty to report to your customers, your clients and all that, but then also some sort of, I guess, legal fiduciary responsibility to if you don't know, you have to assume the worst, that they took the most important stuff out of your system. So how if you were to sit down basically and explain to a licensee, like, all right, this is what you have to do to make sure that you're documenting this properly. So I can get 20/20 hindsight, right? We go, oh man, we really messed up. We should have been looking at these things. How do you sit someone down and just walk through that simple process of here's how you document the day-to-day, end of the day, you need to have Z record and X record, and what are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to do this? Again, small businesses, not a ton of resources. How do I do this?
Yeah. I look to the frameworks and the standards that are out there. I mean, they need to be interpreted down into what's meaningful for the small business. But the National Institute of Standards and Technology has a framework that begins the process of how do you think through that. Sightline Security has taken that framework and kind of customized it for nonprofits so that it's already in their language. And that's one of our real challenges, Brad, to be honest, from our side. We have got to do a better job of turning this into language that others can understand that way. But that's a key piece of just all of this, having that framework. I mean, there's structure that one would hope your IT vendors would know. Some do, some don't, as to how do you organize, I mean, how do you build the network so that it's secure? There's basic principles around doing that. How do you control access? There's basic principles for how you do that. What you should be logging and auditing, there's basic principles for how to do that. So no business owner should feel they have to reinvent the wheel. That's out there. What's necessary is for them the business itself to provide the leadership and to say, we're going to make this happen. That we're going to do it. It's a part of our responsibility to the community. So we'll do that. And then particularly for the small businesses, some of it is train your people into phishing attacks and so on. And the rest of it is pretty much all IT. So now you got to look down and make sure that IT understands all of these things as well. As I say, some do, some don't. Our experience, sadly, is that more don't than do. I mean, when we go in and do assessments, we find holes all over the place. But that said, it's a learning situation. We're in the early stages of what 3 years from today, we should be doing a whole lot better. We'll move as fast as we can move. And of course, Secure the Village, we want everybody to move faster. But, we'll do it as fast as people can be ready.
Right on, right on.
And
Thank
Dr.
you.
Stan, thank you so much for talking about those NIST standards. And I just want to alert everyone that's listening to this, either on the replay or watching live, that the DCR BLC team is here for you. So we have prepared all of these checklists and these different sheets and lists of referrals and these resources. We have gone out and done some of that work for you, so you can begin to implement some of this into your business. That is the whole point of this program, to make these technologies more accessible and to really support your business. DCR, BLC, they want your business to be supported. So all of these standards that Dr. Stan and Haley are talking about, and these suggestions that they're having, we've started to build out some of those documents that you can begin to use in your business. So I do have to plug that learning management system that Brad touched on earlier, because that is what it's here for. It's here for you to use. It's here for you to read over the different documents, look at the different webinars that are featured, the replays, if you haven't had a chance to catch the ones earlier. And then we also have other content that is just going to be featured on that LMS. So we just can't help but plug that more. It is really your support system through this. And that is DCR just really doing the work for you through this BLC program. We had another great audience question, and that is, should cannabis business operators start including cybersecurity compliance as a requirement when hiring new staff, similar to a new orientation safety video that new employees are required to watch and sign off prior to starting their first shift? So what do you all think about this as owner operators are beginning that hiring process and talking about kind of cybersecurity? Is this something they should do at the onset of that new employee training?
Yes.
Thumbs up.
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think that's a great idea. And, I think it would be something that would be great to tie in to where you have that, just again, kind of like that orientation. So you're having that cybersecurity training. I'd say at the same time, it'd be great to go ahead and have that robbery and burglary awareness training. It would just to have that from the get-go and understand how to respond in those events, knowing what you can and cannot access on computers, knowing what you can and cannot click on. I know that me, for example, I get at least 50 emails a day that looks just like my Amazon account, but I know better than to click on it because I know that they're not shutting down my account for any reason. But it is something where just having that training from the beginning, I think training is the best way to set somebody up for success and make sure that you're keeping your business safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely agree. And also, I just want to add to it as well. We see two types of training. One type is, here, go watch this online, and while you're doing it, do 101 other things as well. That doesn't really do a good job of training. Get somebody in the room or on the virtual room, whichever it is. And ultimately, information security starts in the conversation. Have the conversation, just like what we're doing right now. This isn't, like I'm going to open up your head and pour cybersecurity knowledge in and have it work that way. Education doesn't happen. It's in the conversation that it takes place. So as you're teaching them information security, phishing attacks, and why they have to log into the point of sale system and so on, bring it back to things in their own home, their own family, their need to protect their kids from bullying online is a whole other dimension that we haven't even begun to talk about, but it's all part of the same thing. what's on, how do we navigate online in a healthy way? Yeah. As you're teaching about logging in to the point of sale system, talk about logging in at the home to your computers there, about keeping them patched and updated, things like that. Talk about freezing credit, as a way to protect your family's identity. Because as we do those things, and as the business also teaches what we need for the business to do, it's now up in the brain, the dots are getting connected. It's all one thing, this cybersecurity stuff. And as they learn more about it, they'll even begin to see what's going on in Ukraine and all the cyber stuff that's associated with that. Those dots will begin to get connected. And now you can begin to get a piece of, wow, there's some real stuff here.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to pull in one other audience question. Dr. Stan, what was the name again of that LA-based cybersecurity organization that you referenced earlier?
So there's this LA-based is us, and that's Secure the Village. There is also, I don't know where headquarters is. I think it's in the East Coast somewhere, the Cyber Readiness Institute, also a nonprofit devoted towards the small businesses. I'm on their advisory council, their small business advisory council. They do a lot of good work. And then in Massachusetts is Sightline Security. But again, we're all national, so it doesn't matter where we are. Yeah.
Brad, do you have any other questions for our panelists this evening?
I do. It's sort of from the latter part of the conversation, sort of bringing it back to the mode with which we conduct ourselves. And you're talking about cyberbullying and some different things. And it is interesting. There's a lot of sort of the offline world and the online world that we've got to reconcile and figure out how we interact with each other, what's appropriate, what the language is. And thank you guys for really sort of bringing it down to a human level today. It was really super helpful. I know a lot of this jargon is very sort of high tech and it's a little hard to grasp, but you guys made it digestible for us. So I guess it's more of a comment than anything. And I guess I would just put it back to our two subject matter experts here. Is there anything else you guys think that our cannabis social equity business licensees might want to know about cybersecurity or anything else for that matter?
I'd say that, something that I definitely did not touch on, but what you're posting on social media. When you're in your facility and, you take a picture with one of your employees or anything like that, what's in the background of it? Are you allowed to be posting that? Knowing what the regulations are for any marketing or just posting for the business. But that can be a big threat for your business as well, as just what you're posting on social media, and maybe, just not even really thinking about what it is, but, paying attention to that, to your employees, making sure that they're not posting anything they're not supposed to, because that can be a pretty big risk for your business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that whole social media piece is a whole other dimension you have to pay attention to. I would look at it this way, Brad, in terms of answering your question. First of all, I mean, whether you're in a cannabis business or any business, you're going to be managing your dollars. You're going to be managing your inventory, things like that. It's just part of running a successful enterprise. Take that same attitude towards managing your information. Okay, you got to identify your information like we talked about earlier, know who has access to it, know what your devices are, know how it fits into your business, what your legal obligations are, and so on. So you got to know those things. Then you got to protect it. Okay, we've talked somewhat about protecting it, but that's, teaching your people about phishing, that's keeping your system patched and updated, that's all that protection. And then we got to be able to detect when something goes wrong. I mean, we kind of jumped over that piece, but you need to have, first of all, systems in place that are going to tell you when something goes wrong before you get that screen that comes up and says, we've encrypted all of your information. It's going to be 3 Bitcoins to ever see it again. You want to know beforehand. So you want things in to detect. Anti-malware is a piece of that. And again, smaller is harder, bigger is not. Something even a small business can do. Just one little idea. Have your IT people put in what's called a virtual server. It doesn't need to be a physical box. It can just be a server running on top of another server, so it doesn't cost you much money. Nothing should ever touch it because it's just there as a decoy. And name it something sexy like financial information or something like that. And set it so that if anything touches it on your network, alarm bells go off. That may be the cheapest detection method you can build. It's not foolproof, but it's, if anything nothing should touch that. Do the same thing, and we talked about everybody should have an account. Create a dummy account and set it so that if anybody touches that dummy account, alarm bells go off. So that's detect. Then you got to be able to respond. And that goes to what we talked about earlier, where, okay, gather everybody together. What are we going to do? We got a problem. Houston, we got a problem. So, okay, know in advance what you're going to do. Don't wait until it happens. That we talked about that. That's being able to respond and then ultimately recover. And that's not just respond to the incident, but do all the whatever is legally required, blah, 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 and get back to business as usual. That whole process is called resilience. And that's what you want. You want your systems, you want your management, your leadership to be resilient that way. So it's identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. With the same seriousness that you manage operations, you manage inventory, you manage finance. And always remember, when IT comes and says, we're good to go, know how to ask questions and understand the answers.
Very cool. And just a super, I'm going to plead ignorance on this question. I love the idea of the virtual server and just kind of putting that out there as bait, calling it financial information. What is the thing that goes ding? What is the thing that sets off the alarm bells? What have you got sitting on that virtual server to make the little red light go off, so I see that something's going on? How does it alert me?
Your IT people can implement a little bit of code, and it depends on the virtual machine and all how they do it. And what happens is anything touches that, the code is always watching. Has anything touched this? Has anything touched this? Oh, something touched this. And now it sends an email off to your IT people. So it's just a little program that just sits and waits. And if something touches the server, it now responds by sending an email to IT, to the owner. You figure out who you want to be notified first.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. This is the process, Brad. This is the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for indulging me.
Yeah.
Couple other audience questions I want to bring in. So one question is, as part of security, can owner operators restrict employees' access to their cell phones while at work?
Yeah. Good gods. So much of it's situational. One extreme, you walk into FBI headquarters down on Veteran and Wilshire, you leave your cell phone on the first floor and you go up to FBI headquarters. You don't even get it in. Other companies will put mobile device management software on the cell phones and now bring your cell phone, but we've got access to it and so on. And other companies are just wide open because again, it's extra overhead. What's critical here is think through the risks. Okay. If you can do something, if you've really only got a few employees and they've been with you for a while and you trust them and you can train them, don't take photos, keep your cell phone in your pocket. Why go spend money? You're bigger, you may not know your employees as well. You're like MedMen, you got stores all over the place. Now you need more controls correspondingly. So it's very situational that way.
Yeah,
Just
and I mean, I would
manage
say,
it.
absolutely manage it. And I would say, a lot of my clients, what they do is they ask for the employees to leave them in the break room.
Mhm.
They'll have lockers so that they can go put them in there safely along with any of their belongings. But You know, if you're out on a showroom floor, you shouldn't really be on your phone. I think the issue, if you have one of those blockers, is if it's something that it detects any of the cell phones that are in that area. So that might include some of your customers that are coming in. But you know, again, it's just leave it in your locker or somewhere where it's safe, and so that when you go take your break, that you can go and get on your phone and do what you got to do. But yeah, I mean, just some good practices to where you don't have to spend the extra money on it is just to have it stored away until you're on your break or off the clock.
Yeah.
Another question that I'm kind of just drawing from some of the chat that has been very active, and we do thank all of our audience members just for their comments, their concerns, the questions that are being raised, and their continued engagement in this Beachside chat that we are just so excited to be here with you discussing internal cybersecurity controls. Another question: should owner operators share security related video with the police? What should be that relationship with law enforcement? Should you be a delivery driver and some kind of crime occurs? You know, so what would that look like as far as being able to potentially share with law enforcement, or either locally or, you know, other law enforcement officials, statewide, et cetera?
Yeah, absolutely. For the most part, it should just be an easy to share link. So they don't have access to make any changes to it or anything. You can say, okay, it was between, you know, this time and that time on this date, and that's all the footage they need. But it's usually pretty easy to share it. And I'd say that most businesses are pretty open to doing that, as long as it's not inside of their facility that shows their operations, when it's not something related. But exterior cameras, that's kind of what they're meant for. You know, it's to be able to detect any crime that might be going on, but also for safety purposes. And so I'd say for the most part, you can share it via a link, or it would be just some sort of way that they can share that with no problem to the police.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, one of the challenges that law enforcement has in cyber is that too few organizations share breach information with government, whether it's local law enforcement or national law enforcement. And it really makes fighting cybercrime more difficult, because we miss reams of evidence that otherwise could be out there. And a breach in one location, if reported, the knowledge of how that breach happened could be made available to hundreds of other businesses, so they could provide defenses against those. So it's really important from the community perspective that we share information with law enforcement about breaches. At the very minimum, I would recommend there's a part of the FBI called IC3, and you can file a report of a breach or an incident to IC3. It's kept confidential. And as I say, at a minimum, I would recommend doing that. And also at some points with breaches, you get into the legal question of that you have a legal obligation to notify the victims of those breaches. And if you're a big enough company, so this would not apply to some of the smaller ones, but the larger ones with enough data, enough revenue, actually have significant liability if they're breached, and residents, California citizens, have their information stolen. That can be extremely costly for a company.
Finally, what would we say to folks who may be on the line and say, I have a small business, the likelihood of some cybersecurity related incident like a hack or my security cameras being breached is unlikely. I'm not going to be targeted. What would we say to those folks who may not think they have arrived at that point of being able to be hacked, or their data being breached, or their security cameras being looked at by some third party? And especially now, we know that a lot of these cybersecurity incidents, they're not necessarily local, right? Some are they're happening across nations, and they're sometimes happening with non-state actors. So we know that, you know, this space of cybersecurity it's not just someone in LA who may be hacking you. You could have hackers from all over the world, right? So we know that that's happening. But what if we feel, what if folks are on the line feeling like, you know, this may not happen to them? What would we say in those cases?
I'd say it's not if it happens, it's when it happens.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of vulnerabilities out there, and the best that you can do is kind of everything that we've been talking about is those procedures and making sure that you can follow up with everything that's included in that. So being able to go through and audit all your systems, verifying who's been logging into what, and that it is somebody who is supposed to have access to those systems, and really be prepared for it. Because I'll say that if there is an event that occurs, insurance companies will not cover you if you weren't proactive about it. It is something you have to be proactive about, and really prepare for it to happen.
Yeah, that's so true. And to expand it, there's a general concept in all of this called risk. And what ultimately cybersecurity is all about, managing risk. So risk there's two elements to risk. Okay, how likely is something to happen? And then what are the consequences if it does? All right. I mean, I can walk out of my house, and the likelihood, if I don't stop and look both ways before crossing the street, I live in a residential area, the likelihood of something bad happening is trivial. I mean, it's tiny. But the consequence of my walking across the street without looking both ways, and I get hit by a car, that's kind of fundamental, right? We're talking life now. So it's what's the likelihood and what's the consequence if it does. So some things, the likelihood is small enough, particularly after you've got basic security, that you've reduced the likelihood of something happening small enough so that, if something bad happens, we've reduced that probability because we put in controls. And we've got enough, more or less, so we don't want to spend any more money there. Let's go spend it on marketing or the other things we can do. But other things, and particularly when you're starting right at the beginning, the first thing you got to do is, again, when I said earlier about knowing your information, your crown jewels, what's the consequence to your business? Even if it's a small probability that it happens, what's the outcome? How big, how serious is that to your business? And you can actually write equations, and there's mathematics behind it, but you don't need to go that far. But just think about what's the downside if I don't do this? And the downside, sadly, can be you lose your business. You go out of business. You've invested all your time, all your money of maybe of your friends in this. And now a ransomware attack that could have been blocked simply by training your people, you didn't do. I mean, aren't you going to kick yourself? So you got to understand what the risks are, what the threats are, and then think through it logically. Am I going to spend $100,000 to protect $50,000? No. Am I going to spend $1,000 to protect 50? If I've got a reasonable chance of being hit, now it makes sense. So think through that way. Again, that's part of the conversation to have.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Stan Stahl and Haley Glover. Thank you guys so much for spending some of your precious evening time with us. This has been an extremely illuminating conversation. And Dr. D, as always, thank you for keeping the conversation going, informing it, and keeping us going. And of course, a big thanks to Los Angeles City Department of Cannabis Regulation, Social Equity Program, Business Licensing and Compliance Program. They're the ones who have made this all possible. They're the ones who are supporting this content, this convening, the learning management system, where all this material will eventually be there for you guys, for social equity cannabis businesses, as a resource for you. So we appreciate the opportunity provided by them to be here for you, with you. And just so you know, if you have any extra questions, Dr. D and I will be available tomorrow. We're going to have an open free session. If you guys want to pop in and ask some questions, we can help you guys out as much as possible. Some of the other crew from the LA Metro team will be joining us as well. But again, a thank you to Dr. Stan and to Haley for spending some time with us. This was a lot of fun. It was a very enjoyable conversation. I certainly learned a lot. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Certainly, thank both of you. Thanks for what you're doing, bringing this such an important topic to the community. I mean, kudos to you both, and to the city as well for this. So thanks.
Right on. Thanks, guys.
Mhm. There we go. We done? I think we're done.